What's up, guys? Can you hear me okay? Yes. Awesome. So I was looking on Siri a while ago. I said, Siri, how far am I from home? You are 13,263 kilometers away from home. That's a long way. But I'm very happy to be here. I came 2 years ago to Australia. I said, can I go to New Zealand, please? Please? No. So I said, if I come back to the area, I'm coming here first. So you guys are actually getting a talk I've never given before. And it was funny. Grant said, yeah, tell them a little bit about your story. Tell them what's going on in the low-carb world and talk about ketosis. I'm like, in an hour? Yeah. Seriously, dude? But I'm going to do my best. How many have never heard my story before? Raise your hand. Okay, well, I'm going to give my story. In 2004, that was Jimmy Moore. 410 pounds, what's that? Help me with the kilos. A 185 kilo? Big, let's put it that way. 3 prescription medications for high cholesterol, high blood pressure, breathing problems. I was a mess at the age of 32, and I had tried every diet known to mankind. Can I get a witness, anybody? I mean, it was low fat, slim fast, Dexatrim pills. I'm sure you have all your little gimmicks in this country too. I tried them all. And like Karen was just saying, none of them are sustainable because you're always hungry. So I was always hungry. And in fact, in 1999, this is my wife, Christine, right here. Stand up, honey. Hello, hello. So in 1999, I did a no-fat diet. I mean, no fat at all. So what did I eat? Naturally fat-free marshmallows. Yeah. And a naturally low-fat food, Twizzlers. Do you guys have Twizzlers, the red vines? Yeah, you know what I'm talking about, the licorice stuff. Yeah, so I lost a whole lot of weight eating that way, but it was all will. I mean, how do you not? So I remember one day Christine said, hey, go get me a Big Mac meal from McDonald's. I said, okay, but only if I can get a 1/4 pounder with cheese and supersized fry and supersized drink just this one time. Well, I guess you know what happened next. 4 months later, I had gained back all that weight that I lost. It was over triple digits in pounds. So in Christmas of 2003, I had gotten a diet book from her mom for Christmas. I love you, Mom, but yes, I know I'm fat, thank you. But she had given me diet books every single year. It was Dr. Phil's book one year. It was the Weight Watchers another year. It's like, okay, I get it. You know I'm fat. That's cool. All right, we're done. But this year, this particular year, this 2003, she gave me Dr. Atkins' New Diet Revolution. And I read this book between Christmas and New Year's, and I went, eat less carbs. That is the stupidest thing in the whole world I've ever heard. Doesn't he know that's where you get your energy from? Eat more fat? Does this guy know you're going to clog your arteries doing that? But I had tried everything, and it failed. And if you've ever been morbidly obese in your life, you know the frustration I'm talking about. You've tried and tried and tried again, and they all fail. But I was like, what the heck? I'd done everything and always felt deprived before. Why don't we give this low-carb, high-fat Atkins diet a try? So January 1st, 2004, I hop on the scale, and I actually didn't have a scale in my house that would weigh me. And I had to go to like 3 or 4 different like gyms. I finally went to a Gold's Gym, which is a popular gym chain in America. And I said, how high does your scale go? He said, oh, it goes to 500 pounds. I'm like, I'm nowhere near 500 pounds. I thought at the time I was 335 pounds. I was 410 pounds. Talk about a dissonance in reality and what I thought. That was a wake-up call. So it motivated me to really give this a go. So January 1st, 2004, I went from that man and decided to do the low-carb, high-fat. The first month, I lost, I'm trying to do the kilo translation for you guys, about 13 kilo, 30 pounds. And then the second month, I was so energized, I had to go to the gym and start walking on the treadmill for 10 minutes. I tell people I was weightlifting. I was weightlifting. So I lost another 40 pounds, what's that, like 17 kilo in the second month. By the end of 100 days being on this diet, I had lost 100 pounds, which is unheard of, 45 kilo in 100 days. Amazing. And I went through a period of time where I didn't lose any weight on the scale, but I still was losing inches on my body. And I was like, okay, something is interesting about this diet that unlike any diet I'd ever had before. And oh yeah, by the way, in the meantime, I've come off a couple of those prescriptions already by that point. I had no hunger. I was eating steak and eggs and cheese and butter and all the forbidden foods that you're not allowed to have, and some green leafy vegetables too. I just didn't want you to think I was just eating meat and cheese. So all these forbidden foods, and yet I was losing weight and I was feeling better. That was the cool thing, that suddenly out of nowhere, that man no longer existed. He's still in my head, by the way. I can still see that guy every once in a while. So by the end of the year, I did lose 180 total pounds, which is what, 85 kilo, something like that. A lot of weight. And it got the attention of the Atkins people. They wrote to me and they said, hey, we heard you lost a little weight on our diet. Yes, I did. So they said, can we feature your story on the front of our page? I'm like, I don't care. So they threw it up there, and I started getting emails from all around the world. Where's your blog? Where's your book? You know, who are you? Tell us more. How'd you do it? And I'm going, will you people leave me alone? But I said, okay, maybe I do need to start writing, and I had a little bit of English writing in my background, so I had an undergrad double major in English and political science. So I was like, okay, what the heck, let's start writing. So a buddy of mine had a political blog at the time. This was 2005. Blogs were not, I guess, real popular in the health realm. And he said, you need a blog. And I was like, what the heck is a blog? What do you do? Oh, you just write your thoughts. I'm like, well, I can write. So I started writing my thoughts, and that thing started growing. I called it Livin'La, Vida, Low-Carb. In fact, let's go forward. There it is. Livin'La, Vida, Low-Carb blog. And yes, I stole it from Ricky Martin, in case you're wondering. I was listening to Livin'La, Vida, Low-Carb. I was like, that's my blog, yes, yes. So I started that blog, and it built in pretty quick, like 10,000 readers a month within the first couple of months, and today it's got about 250,000 readers around the world every single month. And so a year later, this guy comes to me and he says, dude, if you talk half as good as you write, you need to have a podcast. So what did I say to him? What the heck is a podcast? This was 2006. Nobody, let's see, Rob Wolf didn't have his podcast yet. I don't even think Sean Croxton. Nobody had a podcast out that's like out there. Now everybody and their mama has a podcast. But so he said, dude, you've got to start a podcast. So I'll do a compilation. I'll be your producer. You know, you do like a 5-minute rant. I'm like, well, I can rant. So I started doing these little rants on this show called the Health Hacks Podcast. And about a month later, the guy comes back to me and he says, nobody's listening to any other part of the show but you. You need your own show. And I'm like, I don't know how to do this. I don't know what a podcast, I still don't know what a podcast is. He's like, just do it, I'll produce you. He's still my producer today. His name's Kevin Kennedy Spain, by the way. And the Livin'La Vida Low-Carb show was birthed in October 2006, and as Grant noted, it is the longest running health podcast. We're about to hit episode 900 next month, and very proud of that show. It was funny, the first 50 episodes was just more rants. I just took like old blog posts and dramatized them. HFCS is gonna kill you, you know. But that's the first 50 episodes, and then I started attending some of these conferences, obesity conferences and health conferences, and somebody said, you need to start interviewing people. I'm like, I don't know how to do that at all. How many people listen to my podcast? How many of you think I'm a professional interviewer now? Then I was not, and it was a learning process, but I have learned so much. I mean, I've gotten to talk to anybody and everybody in the realm of health. as it relates to low carb and even vegans. Anybody heard my interview with John McDougall? Yeah, that was pretty infamous. Google Jimmy Moore, John McDougall if you want to have a laugh. All right. So let's go to, that's my story and I'm sticking to it. Let's go to what's going on in the low carb world, because there's a lot of really cool things happening right now. It may not seem like it sometimes, but we're going to talk about some of those things. Now, on Fridays, I have another podcast. Grant mentioned Ask the Low Carb Experts, which is on hiatus right now, but it's good backlist. But on Fridays, this is a dietitian, kind of like Karen is, dietitian Cassie, and I talk about different health headlines from the perspective of LCHF. So we kind of look at headlines that are kind of wacky, and we make fun of them and correct them. So it's kind of fun. So that's kind of what we do on that show. Lowcarbconversations.com is the website address if you want to listen. But let's take a look at some of the things that we've talked about on that show and that's happening. So fat is where it's at, right? And we've seen a lot of good positive press with fat. So this was the front cover of Time magazine back in June of this year. Eat butter. Maybe we got it all wrong about saturated fat. Yeah, you think? And see, we see where Time magazine over the years has kind of embraced the lipid hypothesis. So that's pretty cool. Then we've had several interesting studies come out. The top one at the British Medical Journal, Dr. Aseem Malhotra from the UK, and then the Annals of Internal Medicine, another one that said, you know what, we've looked at all the data on saturated fat and heart disease. It ain't there. It doesn't exist. And so we're seeing more and more of that kind of thing happening. And then we have headlines like this one, saturated fat isn't bad for your heart. Major study questions decades of dietary advice. Would you have believed that would happen just 5 years ago? I wouldn't have. In fact, back in the mid-2000s, I was asking my readers, I would do an annual little survey of my readers on my Livin'La Vida Low Carb blog, and I would say, how many years do you think it's going to take before we start seeing like mainstream acceptance of the low carb, high fat diet? Some, when I first started doing it, never. It's just never going to happen. There was just a lot of pessimism. 50 years, 75, never. Next year, it was like, okay, it's going to happen sometime in our generation, like sometime in the next 50, 75 years. Then the next year, well, maybe 30 years from now we'll see some. And then the latest one I did was 2010, and people were saying within 10 years, we're going to see headlines that say saturated fat isn't bad for your heart. It's here. We got it. And we have more op-ed pieces. Everyone was wrong. Saturated fat's actually good for you. Look at this quote from this column. In the last 30 years, Americans have lowered their fat by 10%, but obesity has doubled. Hello? Maybe low fat's not the answer? Then over in the UK, Michael Mosley is saying, should people be eating more fat? So we're getting a lot of positive messages about fat, which is kind of cool because I think it's the last barrier to low-carb acceptance. I think a lot of people right now understand the problem with carbohydrate, but they don't necessarily want to embrace the fat. I was watching the TV interview that Grant and Karen did, and the reporter was like real hesitant to eat the butter. I'm like, it's just food, dude. Come on, eat it. So let's look at some news stories. And speaking of, this aired in your great country on the Third Degree. And yeah, you might recognize who that is. Great, great exposure. I mean, that was incredible. Even though they had that idiot person come after you and try to discredit you, he just looked stupid. But the dietitians didn't like you too well, did they? Where's Karen? There you are. They didn't like you too well. They had to send out this little thing that you had to do tit for tat, answering each, charge they were having. It's amazing when you can engage the culture like that. Now, I know when you were in the midst of that, you probably were like, okay, this is a bad thing. It's a very good thing. when you can start engaging the culture. We can't even get an engagement like that in America of the powers that be in regards to nutrition. We're trying, but it's an uphill battle. Now, over in your neighboring country of Australia, they had the Heart of the Matter on cholesterol that aired last year. And then they had a nanny statist that said, you need to remove that because people are going to die from taking off statins. And then guess what? They removed it from their website. But here's the fun part about the internet. It never dies. You can actually watch both of those segments still, and you can look out on YouTube or Vimeo. Just type in the Heart of the Matter dietary villains and Heart of the Matter, the cholesterol drug war, and you'll find them. They're there. And in fact, tonight, right now, as of recording this right now on that video, in Australia, there's another great show, Low-Carb Diet, Fat or Fiction, on that Catalyst show. And I'm surprised they're doing this after they pulled the one about the cholesterol, but we'll take it. And it's already gotten some pretty cool headlines. Reader on Twitter sent this to me. This was yesterday's headline in Australia. We must curb carbs. Wow. Is that not amazing? Again, never would have thought this would happen this quickly. Now, how about books? Anybody bought these books? Wheat Belly, Grain Brain. You got Dr. William Davis, who's a good personal friend of mine. You got Dr. David Perlmutter. Both of these books hit the New York Times bestseller, #1 in their category. Pretty amazing. I think it shows people are really craving that message. And then this year, the big fat surprise, anybody got this book? You need to get this book. If you're worried about fat still, that book will convince you we've been lied to, big time. So how about TV and film? Now, a very famous health, do you guys see the Dr. Oz show in this country? I'm sorry. So he has long been an antagonist of the low-carb message. In fact, many years ago, 2007 or 8, he had a very famous episode with Gary Taubes about good calories, bad calories, where he basically lampooned the low-carb, high-fat diet. He has made a turnaround. He's starting to talk more and more. I'm trying to get on his show with my co-author, Dr. Eric Westman, and talk about ketosis, but he has made a turnaround about carbs and realizes the blood sugar connection that Grant was talking about. This is huge, huge. In fact, Dr. David Perlmutter, the Grain Brain author, he was on there last year and he said, butter is back, and the whole audience thunderously applaud. And I'm sitting there watching that just kind of in a surreal state. I'm like, is this really happening? Because, again, wouldn't have ever thought that would happen this quickly. Do you guys get Comedy Central? Can you see South Park in this? Did anybody see Gluten-Free Ebola? This was hilarious. Anybody not seen it? It was hilarious. So South Park is a very cutting-edge, edgy, even profane. In fact, this Gluten-Free Ebola, they did something down there I'm not going to talk about, but it was just strange. But the messages that they sent about gluten and gliadin, how they're unhealthy for you, and that the food pyramid needs to be flipped upside down. I'm like, are they listening to my podcast? And then at the end of the show, they served everybody steak with butter. I kid you not, this was just on October 1st in America. So we have some great documentaries that are out there. Serial Killers, Donnell, over in South Africa. And then this is a new one that just came out, Carb Loaded. You definitely need to check this one out. Carbloadedmovie.com, I think is the website, but just Google it. And then the Fed Up movie was also very good. Don't agree with everything in that movie, but I think the overall message of getting away from the processed foods and the food culture that we have is a good thing. So a lot of people say, well, what's going on with Tom Naughton? How many saw Fathead? Raise your hand. If you haven't seen Fathead, you need to see Fathead. This is, in fact, somebody before we came on said, Fathead changed my life. And, thank you. It was her. that had changed her life, and so she started on this journey because of that movie. Well, Tom has been wanting to do another film for a long time, so he actually started dibble-dabbling with his daughters, doing little videos you might have heard about on YouTube, the Fathead Kids Club. Definitely look those up, they're hilarious. But coming in 2015, he's got a book and a DVD project coming, so that should be good. All right, so how about the cultural impact? So U.S. News and World Report always does this great Google's most popular diets of the year, and this was last year's list of the top 5 most popular diets. Now, paleo has been hitting really big lately. I kind of dibble-dabble in the paleo community as well. I have a lot of friends there. But did you see what number 5 was? Ketogenic, nanny, nanny, boo-boo. It's there. People are interested in low-carb, high-fat. And then if you look at the top health podcasts, 9 of the top 12 in the fitness and nutrition iTunes health podcast category are low-carb, primal, paleo-friendly. There's mine, number 9, by the way. So how about in the sports and athletics field? The LA Lakers were put on a low-carb, high-fat diet. Did you guys know that? So Dr. Kate Shanahan is one of the low-carb, high-fat, ketogenic diet medical practitioners in America. And she's the official sports doctor, team doctor for the Lakers. And she said, let's put them on there and see how they do. And so they actually, a lot of them reported, extending their careers. I know Kobe Bryant is still playing today, despite having some really, rough times when he was trying to get over being carb addicted and now is keto adapted. So that's pretty cool. And then, of course, LeBron James, the most famous basketball player in the world, this summer, no sugar, no carbs, no dairy. He did that for a couple months and really made a lot of headlines. That's the kind of thing that has to penetrate our culture. Famous people making this happen. I'm not talking about Kim Kardashian. LeBron James is a great example of maybe some kids will say, hey, well, LeBron gave up the carbs. I'm going to give them up and see how I do. That could be very powerful. And then Timothy Allen Olson was on my podcast a couple of years ago. He's an endurance athlete. He won the Western States 100 endurance race, and he broke the record by 20 minutes in a low-carb, high-fat, ketogenic state. Pretty amazing. Then he went back the next year, and he won it again. And then in August of this year, over at the Low Carb Down Under tour in Melbourne, Dr. Peter Bruckner, who is the Australian cricket leader. I know, I'm sorry, I had to mention that. I'm going to Australia next month, so I'll get cheers there. And he's talking about how LCHF has helped those players. So how about in the business realm? Are businesses suffering because of LCHF? Fat Santa Claus says they are, because Coca-Cola's sales are way down. And people don't realize this, but they are trying desperately to shift their marketing from sugary drinks to the non-caloric drinks, whether that's water, whether that's the diet drinks, which I think can be horrendous if they use horrible sweeteners. They do have a big fat problem, and they've got to do something about it. And I think a lot of the work that Dr. Robert Lustig has done on sugar, and of course Sarah Wilson and different ones in Australia and different ones around the world have really impacted that. And then on Mickey D's front, they're down 30% in sales. I know, right? That is worth a woohoo! So we're seeing more and more things happening as a direct result of LCHF. I'm taking credit. It's LCHF that did that. Just kidding. So what about in the science realm? So there's 2 guys that are working very hard. You might recognize that guy, Gary Taubes, and Dr. Peter Attia. They're running a group called NUSI, and they're getting a lot of exposure for the work they're doing. They are in the midst with NUSI, Nutrition Science Initiative, nusi.org if you want to look at the work that they're doing. But they're doing scientific experiments looking at low-carb, high-fat diets and their effect on health. And they're not going to any of the usual suspects when it comes to the researchers. They're not going to Dr. Finney, Dr. Volek, Dr. Westman, any of the ones that you would think he would. He's going purposefully to people that would be antagonistic towards the message. That's integrity. That you so believe that they're going to find what they're going to find that you're willing to let them do it and hope that they do it well. Of course, they're watching them, of course, to make sure that they follow all the protocols. But this is big, big. And then we're seeing headlines about high-fat diets may postpone aging, may be linked to treating Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease. Really? That's amazing. And yet we're seeing that more and more and more. You're going to be watching headlines now very closely because it's really changing. The world is changing. Now, what about the world? Speaking of the world, what's happening with LCHF around the world? Sweden, of course, has taken this thing and run with it. That's Dr. Andreas Einfeldt and Dr. Annika Dahlqvist. They are the two that are really leading the charge for LCHF in Sweden. In fact, it was Dr. Einfeldt who contacted me, when was that, Christine, like 2008 or 9? It was early on when we were doing low-carb cruises. We still do a low-carb cruise every year. And so he's like, I would like to come speak on your low-carb cruise. That's how he talks. Sorry, Andres. So I was like, sure, who the heck are you? I didn't know who he was. And so he's like, I am Andreas Einfeldt, and I am a doctor in Sweden. Okay. And I talk about LCHF. I said, what is that? This was like 2007 or 8. Had never really heard the letters before. Oh, it's low carb, high fat. I'm like, ooh, yeah, come on. So he came, and he's been a stalwart on our cruise every year. But he has really done a great job. And Dr. Annika Dahlqvist actually got sued by a couple of nanny dietitians who said, you can't use low-carb diets with diabetics, you're going to kill them. Low-carb diet is for a diabetic. Don't they understand that? And so she's like, bring it on. And she's a fighter. She's one that won't back down from the fight. And she won that battle. Now the official guidelines in the government in Sweden say low carb is tried and true in the science. You cannot mess with it. It is just as good a treatment option as a low fat or any other diet. Please do that in America. I keep telling my co-author, Dr. Eric Westman, my co-author on the book, you need to get sued. He doesn't like it when I say that. So. Now over in South Africa, Professor Tim Noakes is doing a lot of great work as well for the LCHF message. In fact, he is putting together the very first international low-carb, high-fat summit in his country, which Dr. Westman and me and Dr. Finney and Dr. Jay Wortman, I'm not sure if Jeff Volek's going. Anyway, it's a bunch of us are going over there to talk in February about LCHF. So that's happening there. And then, of course, over in your neighboring country of Australia, we have these three men that have put together the Low Carb Down Under series, Dr. Rod Taylor, Dr. Z. Shanna Rain, and Jamie Hayes. And we're seeing more and more from this side of the world. We need something like this in America, besides a low-carb cruise. And then, of course, how could I not mention our two luminaries here tonight doing a great job. See, you can pose with fat. There's butter right there. It's an inside joke. So you might see these kinds of warnings, right? Ketosis kills. Warn your loved ones. But I want you to do this. Keep calm and be encouraged, because we are winning. This message is getting out there. And you are your own best health advocate in your inner circle of people. People always write to me and they say, well, I don't want to start a blog because you already do a blog. I don't want to start a podcast. And I said, it's not about that. It's about impacting the people in your sphere of influence. Now, I have a huge sphere of influence I'm very grateful for. But you all have people in your lives that I will never reach. That's your job, to be encouraged through all the ups and downs of what the health headlines say. Be encouraged, because we are winning. I did all that in half an hour. Now I got a half hour for ketosis. Okay, 12 things we got all wrong about ketosis. So I did write a book called Keto Clarity. It's right there. We're going to give a copy away, I think Grant said, before we leave tonight. But I wrote this because I was looking around for a book about low-carb, high-fat diets and ketosis that wasn't about weight loss and wasn't about epilepsy, because that was all I could find when I started researching this topic. Guess what? Didn't exist. So I went to the publisher that had let me write a book last year called Cholesterol Clarity. Anybody get that book? Thank you. And so they're like, hey, what else you got? And I said, well, there's this topic called ketosis and ketogenic diets that I think would be interesting. They totally blew it off. They said nobody would buy a book about ketosis and ketogenic diets. I'm like, you underestimate me. So I started doing the research and found all these health benefits from ketosis, and I presented it to them, and they're like, okay, we get it. There's a lot of evidence. Oh, okay, you're going to write the book. It's not going to do as good as Cholesterol Clarity, but you can write the book. Wrote the book, and in 1 week, this book sold more copies than Cholesterol Clarity did in the first year. Now they're fans of ketosis. They came to me about 2 weeks after Keto Clarity came out and said, okay, we want a cookbook now. So I'm like, I don't do cookbooks. I don't do that. So I got a co-author who's going to collaborate with me next summer on a cookbook. Anybody know Maria Emmerich? You know her? Look her up, mariamindbodyhealth.com. But Keto Clarity is all about ketosis. Anybody not know what keto means? Okay, most of you. Okay, few. Okay, so for the few of you who don't know, so basically what you're doing is shifting your body over from being a sugar burner to being a fat burner. So you need to cut off all the sources of sugar, which obviously is sugar, or any carbohydrate that would turn to sugar in the body, and even protein, which we'll talk about here in a second, and then eating more fat. You do all of those things and then test for ketones, which we'll also talk about here in a second, and you'll be in this state called ketosis. And it allows your body to burn fat for fuel. So let's get into some of the things we've gotten all wrong about ketosis. Number one, thinking ketosis is an unhealthy and dangerous state. Anybody talk to their doctor and you told them you're doing LCHF or in ketosis, or he gets a urine test back or some test that says you have the presence of ketones and you about had a conniption fit? Yeah? A few of you. Well, guess what? They're dumb, because that's just not going to happen with somebody that's not type 1. Okay, so here's the type 1s on the diabetes spectrum. 90% of diabetics are what's called type 2 diabetes. They still have some beta cell function. In other words, they can still make some insulin, at least a little bit. If you can make even a little bit of insulin, guess what? You cannot get into this state that we're about to talk about. Type 1 diabetics do have to care about this because they have no beta cell function, no insulin at all, and so this is something that's very serious for them. So the term is diabetic ketoacidosis that they're confusing with ketosis. So let's say a diabetic that's type 1 that has no beta cell function, no insulin, eats that, and don't lick your lips like that's good. Maybe the meatballs are good. And then eats that. But guess what? Do they take insulin? Nah, they decide I can handle those carbs. I'm a type 1 diabetic with no insulin. No, what's going to happen? What's the worst that could happen? Well, let's see what would happen. Hyperglycemia kicks in, 13 plus blood sugar. That's a 240 reading for our American listeners. And then ketones go 20 millimolar plus. So that's extremely high blood sugar, extremely high blood ketones, and when those two things are present, acidosis goes up. So what happens next? The person goes into a coma, and they can possibly die if they do not get insulin as soon as possible, in addition to some electrolyte balance. But, again, This cannot possibly happen in anyone who still even makes a little bit of insulin, are there any type 1s in the room? Oh, one, okay. So everybody but you, this isn't a worry. But even for you, it's only for people that eat a high-carb meal. Would you ever eat a high-carb meal and not take your insulin? No, you would not. And so when you eat low carb, you don't get into ketoacidosis because you're not raising blood sugar and you don't have the need for a lot of insulin. So here's what happens when a type 1 eats a keto, or really anybody, eats a ketogenic meal. Now that looks good. So you have blood sugar that's steady, around the 4 to 5.5 millimolar. You have blood ketones around 1 to 3. And there's no presence of any kind of acidosis in the body. It just doesn't happen. So number 2, getting into ketosis zaps you of energy, the keto flu. Anybody heard about the keto flu? Yeah. Anybody had the keto flu? All right, we're going to talk about how you can remedy that. So keto flu is, and I wish I had known this in 2004 when I was 4'10", and having all those Charlie horses that Christine would have to massage at 3 o'clock in the morning because I'm screaming like a little baby. Can I get an amen there, right? So it's an electrolyte imbalance that happens. So getting into ketosis is shifting from that sugar burner to fat burner. So what do? You got to drink more water. When you first start on a ketogenic diet, you're going to lose a lot of water. Want to know why? Because all your glycogen stores that have the sugar stored up in your muscles, they have not just sugar, but a lot of water. So you have to replenish that water when you start this. You also need to replenish with salt. So sea salt with bone broth is amazing, and you can just drink it like a little soup, and it's awesome to get that salt. Or you can just salt your food really well. Another mineral is potassium that you want to get back into your diet. If you eat an avocado, you get twice the potassium that you would from a banana. Anybody know that? That you had twice the amount of potassium in it as you do in a banana? I had to look that one up. And then magnesium. So this is your protocol. If you're still dealing with keto flu, or if you decide to start this after hearing these lectures tonight, and you're like, I want to do this, I'm going to go gung-ho, and you start having some of the feelings, do all this and you'll ward it off. So the number 3 thing we got totally wrong about ketosis is a ketogenic diet increases the risk of heart disease. No, it doesn't. And I'm going to tell you why. Well, number 1, I wrote a whole book about it last year, so I do know a couple of things about this topic. It lowers triglycerides like a champ. It raises HDL cholesterol, which is a good cardiovascular risk marker. It makes the small dense LDL particles less. As Grant was talking about in his lecture, triglycerides are low, you probably have less and less small dense LDL particles. It reduces this thing called HSCRP, high sensitivity C-reactive protein is what that stands for, and it's the key inflammation marker in your body. Ideally, you want it underneath 1.0. I recently had mine run 0.44. It drops your blood sugar and your insulin levels, and blood pressure dips. So guess what all of those things are? Cardiovascular risk markers. So what the heck, what the HDL are they talking about? Right? Doesn't hurt your heart. Number 4, simply eating low carb will put you in ketosis. One does not simply eat less carbs. So there's an acronym in Keto Clarity that we put for KETO. Carbohydrate restriction is definitely the first step. Keep carbs low. And in the book we talk about low, like Karen was saying, is going to be a sliding scale depending on your tolerance level. And we tell you how to figure out what your tolerance level is. But then you also need to eat more fat than you probably have ever eaten before. You also need to test your ketones often, which we'll talk about here in just a second. And then you don't want to overdo it on the protein. A couple of common themes you've heard here tonight. And we'll talk about the protein one here in a second too. So number 5, let's talk about the protein. Neglecting the key role of moderating protein intake. That looks good too. I want some of that. Can you tell I haven't eaten in a while? Okay, I'm running on ketones. So this is a very complex metabolic pathway. I'm not going to ask you to memorize it, but if anybody knows what this is, we'll give you the copy of Keto Clarity. So raise your hand if you think you know. I saw you first. Gluconeogenesis. Is that okay? I did that, Grant, wherever he is. He's hiding. Gluconeogenesis. Good job.
Oh, thank you very much.
So that's just a fancy word. And I first heard that word at a medical conference in 2006. And it was funny. That's where I met my co-author, Dr. Eric Westman, was at that conference. And so they talk about GNG and gluconeogenesis and all these kind of complex terms. And I heard about it, and I was like, well, that's interesting, moderating protein. So it was already kind of percolating in my head like 8 years ago, but now it's starting to come more and more to the forefront. So gluconeogenesis, think of it as a new way to begin making sugar in the body. Did you know if you consume too much protein in your diet, it can turn to sugar? Did anybody know that? Good. Have a nice night. Thanks. So yeah, protein restriction, at least moderation, is really key. Now that freaks out some people because they're like, well, what if I don't get enough and I need to give it? You know, you can tinker and test with it, and we talk about it in Keto Clarity, how you can do that. So gluconeogenesis occurs mainly in the liver. Protein in excess of your body's needs is converted to glucose, and if you're trying to be ketogenic, remember we're trying to cut off all sources of sugar, so carbohydrate and protein needs to be moderated. Now, I did a whole one-year experiment of nutritional ketosis back in 2012, 2013, and I found that my carbohydrates were always low. I mean, I've been low since I did the Atkins diet. Right around 30 grams of carbohydrate is my limit. But also protein, I was eating chicken breast and thinking it was healthy. It is not healthy by itself. So you need to have the fat with it. So the fattier cuts of meat certainly help. And if you're sensitive to carbohydrate, just know you're also going to be extremely sensitive to protein. It just makes sense because the protein turns to sugar. The sugar is very easily converted. That's why you can't eat many carbs. You need to moderate both. So Grumpy Cat says he needs carbs. But guess what? He doesn't need to eat them because he gets them from gluconeogenesis. He's a cute cat. All right, so number 6, testing for the presence of ketones only in the urine. That was a mistake that we did that. And here's why. So let's talk about the 3 ketone bodies. Acetoacetate. I'm going to get a little nerdy with you here. Acetoacetate is the ketone body that's measured in the urine. Okay? The beta-hydroxybutyrate is the ketone body that's measured in the blood. And then acetone is the one that's measured in the breath. Okay, so here's what happens. As I forget to highlight there we go, yes. What happens to urine ketones? So they start off, urine ketones are present. So let's say you start LCHF. You start this and you really want to get into ketosis and you start seeing this pink and purple and all these color changes on the urine ketone sticks. Anybody done that? Yeah, we've all done that have started on a low-carb diet. But then you start to get, keto adapted. Okay, that's where you start shifting from being that sugar burner and burning primarily glucose for fuel over to being a fat and ketone burner where you're burning ketones for your fuel. And those acetoacetate in the urine get converted into beta-hydroxybutyrate in the blood. Guess what happens then if you keep testing for urine? Watch the urine one. They disappear. And so then the person panics and they go, what am I doing wrong? Well, guess what? You're not doing anything wrong. You're doing something very right because the acetoacetate has now turned to beta-hydroxybutyrate, which is why Urine testing is very inaccurate. It's also gross. So I've been promoting the last couple of years getting a meter to test for your blood. Is it Freestyle Optium here in New Zealand? Yeah, thank you. So Freestyle Optium, and you can get the blood ketone testing strips pretty cheap here too. I heard about $1 a piece, so that's not bad. In America, they're $5 a piece. I'm working on kicking somebody in the head to bring that down. So test and you'll see where you are. So when we showed the ketoacidosis slide and I showed 20 plus millimolar, that's blood ketones. So you prick, what you want to find is somewhere between like 0.5 and 3.0 optimally. Number 7, limiting grains, fruits, and vegetables will deprive you of nutrients. Anybody heard this one? Yeah. Liar, liars. Because that's not true, is it? Grains. Let's talk about what's wrong with grains. They contain phytic acid, which prevents the absorption of key minerals like copper, magnesium, iron, zinc, and calcium. Yeah, they're real healthy, aren't they? And we've only been eating them for about 10,000 years. And it's very difficult to consume grains without a lot of heavy processing. All these dietitians that like to say, eat your healthy whole grains. I'll be like, where's the whole grain? Because even whole grain bread, you look at it, it's highly processed. Highly, highly processed. And if you don't believe me, get a glucometer and test your blood sugar at 30-minute intervals, 2 to 3 hours after eating. I guarantee you it will not lie. So we have to ask the question, are whole grains really healthy? I don't think anybody in this room thinks that. How about fruits and vegetables? They're all healthy, no problem, right? Well, low starch and low sugar ones are best. Like Karen was saying, the berries is a really great option, especially when you eat them with high-fat cream, like we did last night. Really good, but according to a 2006 American Diabetes Association survey, 35% of American adults and 56% of American children had their vegetable consumption consisting of potatoes, mostly fried. You want to guess what that is? McDonald's French fries. What's that? Pizza's a vegetable. Thank you, Michelle Obama. And so is ketchup, which is high fructose corn syrup on acid. So there's no nutrients in this vegetable. And so they say, well, get your fruits and vegetables. That's what they're eating for vegetables. What about fruit? Bananas tend to be a very popular option for fruit because they taste really good. Well, yeah, they got 29 grams of carbohydrate in them. I eat 30 in a day. So I can have one banana and a bunch of steak the rest of the day, right? So how about ketogenic nutrition? We don't eat grain, sugars, or starch, right? It's mostly whole foods, though, like eggs, meat, nuts, high-fat dairy, non-starchy vegetables. It was funny, I was almost going to put like grass-fed meat, but in New Zealand, it's just called meat. In America, you can't find it very easily, so you have to distinguish the crappy meat or the grass-fed. And so this way of eating also gives you plenty of fat-soluble vitamins that you don't get, by the way, on a vegan diet because they don't eat fat. And if you consume more than just the muscle meats, the organ meats are just loaded with nutrition. And yeah, you can mix it in with your ground beef if that helps. Now, in 2012, I attended a conference called the Ancestral Health Symposium. It's one of those paleo conferences, and Matt Lalonde was one of the speakers. And he did this nutrient density scores ranking. And what he found was that organ meats obviously were the top of the charts. Look at the very bottom. Fruit and grains, those animal fats and oils, those are the ones from the crappy animals we were just talking about that are grain-fed. Processed oils, so like the seed oils that Grant was talking about, are highly inflammatory, on and on. But look at the top. Nuts and seeds. Even cacao, chocolate, yeah, baby. Pork, beef, eggs, on and on. So the nutrient density is on all those ones at the top, and guess what? They just happen to be LCHF friendly. Number 8, eating low-carb, high-fat leads to hypothyroidism. Anybody heard this one? If I hear this one again, I'm going to puke. We do address this pretty heavily in Keto Clarity, but here's the truth. None of the medical practitioners, and I have interviewed literally hundreds upon hundreds of them over the years, I have asked them this question. Do you have patients that deal with hypothyroidism as a direct result of going on a low-carb, high-fat diet? They never see it. It doesn't happen. Now, that's not to say people don't have hypothyroidism. That's a totally separate issue. But the claim is that low-carb causes it. Now, Dr. Ron Rosedale was one of my experts in Keto Clarity, and he said lower thyroid number is not necessarily a lower function. It could mean a better function, that your thyroid doesn't have to work as hard. And so it's very easy to undereat on keto. Can anybody attest to that? When I first started my ketosis experiment, I believe it was like the second or third week, I was sitting there and Christine asked me, when's the last time you ate? I look up at the clock and I go, I don't know, it looks like yesterday about this time. It had been 24 hours since I last ate because I had forgotten to eat. Anybody ever forget to eat? That's very rare on a low-fat diet because of the hunger that Karen was talking about. But on a ketogenic diet, it's extremely easy to undereat. So when that happens, you're in a hypocaloric state, and it's that hypocaloric state that can cause problems in the downregulation of your thyroid numbers. And who's to say those normal numbers on your doctor's panel for thyroid are actually optimal? Maybe people that are keto getting the lower numbers, that's normal. Everybody else is hyperthyroid, right? The fact is the thyroid doesn't have to work as hard when it's fueled by ketones. And despite the lower numbers, ketogenic dieters are usually asymptomatic. They don't see any of the signs of hypothyroidism. And there's definitely no need to consume what's called safe starches, since actually it's carbs that aren't essential in your diet. And it's very interesting, even people who consume a high-carb diet suffer from hypothyroidism. And most of these hypothyroidism, I believe I saw the statistic was 80%, are autoimmune related, which means they can be made worse by consuming starches. A January 2014 BBC news story found European hunter-gatherers 7,000 years ago were already unable to digest starch. So starch was necessary to manage your thyroid levels. Why did that happen? Number 9, the brain needs glucose, right? The brain needs glucose, right, Karen? No? It can operate on an alternative fuel. But let's see what the nosy dietitians say. No, Karen, that won't be you in 30 years. So the nosy dietitians say you need to consume 130 grams of carbohydrate daily for minimal brain function. And this is to ensure that your brain gets exactly the amount of glucose it needs to operate. The assumption is that the brain can only function on glucose as a fuel source, but wrong. Your brain can run very well on ketones. When the ketone bodies get in there, your brain just starts popping. It's a great primary fuel source. In fact, there was a gentleman that I interviewed many years ago, Dr. Larry McCleary. He's a neurosurgeon, and he was the first one that kind of told me about the brain really craves and thrives on ketone bodies as the first fuel of choice. Glucose is like, okay, and there's some brain functions that do need glucose, don't get me wrong, but that's where gluconeogenesis takes care of that part, and then the rest can be fed by the ketones. So what happens to your brain in ketosis? Look at some of this. stabilized mood, decreased sense of anxiety, mental sharpness, feeling of happiness, and a general sense of well-being. Good stuff, right? So number 10, a ketogenic diet cuts calories for weight loss, and this one always is hilarious to me because riddle me this, Batman. We have some very powerful appetite suppressant drugs that are out there that people take, they spend lots of money on, and they say, yes, I need this to control my appetite so I don't eat too much food. Guess what? We have some powerful appetite suppressant foods. Anybody rather take that than that? And yet people think they need to do that when all they need to do is that. Because that's going to provide so much satiety. Pork belly with butter on top sounds really good right now, doesn't it? Number 11, our ancestors didn't live in a constant state of ketosis. And that's true, but let's examine it a bit more. What exactly did our ancestors eat? Let's take a look. So they had all kinds of foods. They had fish, they had meats, they had eggs, fruits and vegetables, nuts and seeds, but they had something else. You want to know what else? Can you guess what else? They had ketones. Because think about it. Did they have food at all times? Could they go down to the Countdown store and buy food on demand? No. Dr. Bill Wilson in Keto Clarity said humans used both glucose and ketone bodies for energy, but during periods of food shortage or after a big animal kill, guess what sustained the early ancestors? This is like being in church and saying that the answer, it sounds like a squirrel, but I'm going to go with Jesus. So it's ketones is the answer. And here are a few final thoughts from Dr. Bill Wilson. Our ancestors spent most of their time in a state of ketosis. If our early ancestors had not developed a way to use ketones for energy, our species would have ended up on Darwin's short list eons ago. And he's right. Because during those periods of starvation, which produces ketones, not a good way to produce ketones, by the way, and during the plentifulness of the animal kill, where they'd eat the fat and the protein, they were in ketosis. So here is a people group that was in ketosis pretty much all the time, because they had to be. The Inuit Eskimos, they would be considered a ketogenic society. They live in an Arctic environment. Can you grow vegetation in an Arctic environment? No. And yet they had to, because all that was there was whale blubber and seal meat and things like that. They ate very low carb, very high fat. So were they sluggish? No, they were energetic and full of stamina, and they really are the first major people group to be fully keto adapted. And the final point that we've gotten all wrong about ketogenic diets is athletes cannot perform well in ketosis. Now, we've already shown how the LA Lakers are on ketosis and how LeBron James famously lost some weight. So athletes load up on carbs, right? Oh yeah, they got to exercise too, so don't be those people. Why fat and ketones fuel exercise better? So in Keto Clarity, I had another Moment of Clarity expert, Ben Greenfield. He's a ketogenic triathlete. He lists 3 things that are good about ketogenic diets for athletes. They are a metabolic superiority of fat for fuel. Did you know if you are burning carbohydrates for fuel, that you have about 2,000 calories worth of energy before you have to refuel? That's why all these athletes that run these races load up on the carbs, because they know generally they only have about 2,000 calories worth of energy, and then on race day they got these goos and all the Gatorade and all this stuff to try to replenish that sugar. Well, guess what happens when you are a fat and ketone burner? Want to guess how many calories you have at your disposal? 40,000 Plus, that's of a lean person, a lot. So let's put it that way. That's how I was able to go 24 hours without eating and didn't even think about it, because you have such a disposal of energy for fuel. Then second point, mental enhancement on ketosis. Anybody been in ketosis and can attest to the mental clarity? That's my word. It's pretty cool. And then the last one, greater health and longevity from controlled blood sugars going ketogenic. So blood sugars going down, blood ketones going up, kind of work in tandem. So that blood sugar going down is a longevity marker. It's a health marker. You want to have that happen. In fact, my next clarity book that Dr. Westman and I want to work on someday is blood sugar clarity, because that's so important in overall health. So ketones are actually the preferred fuel source for the muscles, heart, liver, and we already talked about the brain. None of these vital organs can handle carbohydrates in great amounts very well, and they become damaged when you eat too many of them. Athletes can consume more carbs and protein than non-athletes, but that doesn't mean they can go hog wild. So finding that right mix of macronutrients to improve performance in long endurance exercise is important. And exercise itself actually raises ketone levels. Has anybody that does ketosis like exercise and then maybe tested a couple hours later and you were like, whoa, what happened? That's the exercise is improving your ketones. Plus you have lower inflammation. That's HSCRP number we were talking about earlier goes down, which helps you recover from the workouts. And then ketone bodies are now being referred to in athletic circles as a super fuel. In fact, there's some very famous athletes that aren't sharing their secret with the world because they want to keep it to themselves, but they're eating LCHF and they're in a ketogenic state because they know it's a better fuel. So that's the book Keto Clarity, and thank you guys very much.